There is something psychologically distinct about people who love cats. It may be the way they remain calm in environments that feel overstimulating to others. Maybe it is the way they accept affection without demanding it. Or maybe it is their comfort with relationships that do not announce themselves loudly, but reveal meaning over time. Psychologists and behavioral researchers are only now beginning to understand what a preference for cats actually reveals about perception, emotional regulation, and social orientation. By the end of this video, it becomes clear why people who love cats tend to think, relate, and move through the world differently. To understand this, it helps to look at something most people overlook. Living with a cat is not built around obedience, constant feedback, or predictable responses. A cat does not respond because it is told to. It responds because it chooses to. It approaches when it feels safe, withdraws when it needs space, and communicates largely through posture, movement, and timing rather than sound. This environment quietly trains attention. You learn to notice small shifts instead of obvious signals. A flick of the tail, a pause before movement, a moment of stillness that communicates more than noise ever could. Psychologists call this sensitivity to nonverbal cues. Over time, it strengthens the ability to read situations without forcing interpretation. This is why many people who love cats are comfortable observing before reacting. What appears like emotional distance from the outside is often deliberate awareness on the inside. Cats also introduce a clear lesson in boundaries. They tolerate closeness, but only on their terms. When that boundary is crossed, the response is immediate and consistent. There is no confusion about what is welcome and what is not. Living alongside this clarity reinforces respect for autonomy. Researchers now recognize this pattern as boundary attunement, the ability to register limits without experiencing them as rejection. What this creates over time is emotional restraint that is frequently misunderstood. People who love cats tend not to escalate situations unnecessarily. They do not push for reassurance when space is being communicated. Unlike environments that reward constant validation or overt emotional display, this dynamic encourages patience. Patience here is not passive. It is reinforced through repetition. Cats are also unpredictable. One day they seek proximity, the next they prefer distance. This variability trains tolerance for ambiguity. Instead of demanding consistency, people who love cats learn to coexist with uncertainty. This tendency often shows up later as comfort in relationships that are not rigidly defined. In contrast to environments that value control and constant engagement, this mindset values presence without pressure. Affection is not measured by frequency, but by authenticity. And this quiet calibration becomes the foundation for how this psychological orientation extends far beyond pets and quietly reshapes how people relate to others, interpret space, and respond to emotional demand. This way of relating does not remain confined to interactions with animals. Over time, it shapes how people who love cats approach human connection as well. Consider how affection works in a household with a cat. It arrives quietly. A cat chooses a specific moment, a specific distance, a specific duration. There is no guarantee it will happen again in the same way tomorrow. For someone who loves cats, this unpredictability does not create anxiety. It sharpens appreciation. Affection becomes something noticed, not expected. Psychologists describe this as a form of intermittent reinforcement, where reward is not constant but meaningful. Researchers now recognize that this trains the mind to value quality over quantity. This is why many people who love cats tend to be selective rather than expansive in their emotional investments. When connection is not guaranteed, attention deepens. In relationships, this often appears as emotional independence. People who love cats are rarely preoccupied with constant reassurance. They do not require frequent confirmation to feel secure. Unlike relationships that rely on continuous validation, this orientation supports self-regulation. Emotional stability comes from within,
not from constant external response. What this creates over time is a calm presence. These individuals tend to listen more than they speak. They notice shifts in tone. They register when energy changes in a room. Instead of filling silence, they allow it to exist. This tendency often shows up later as comfort with pauses in conversation and space in relationships. Silence here is not absence. It is information.
Living with a cat also requires adaptation to moods that are not always legible. A cat does not explain why it withdraws. It simply does. Coexisting with this teaches acceptance without interpretation. Researchers describe this as emotional tolerance, the ability to allow feelings without immediately resolving them. This becomes a psychological advantage in adulthood. People who love cats are often less reactive to emotional fluctuation in others. They do not rush to fix what is unclear. They wait. They observe. They allow meaning to unfold. In contrast to environments that reward immediate clarity and constant emotional expression, this mindset supports patience. It recognizes that not every feeling needs translation, and not every moment requires response. Waiting becomes a skill, not a discomfort. Another overlooked aspect is solitude. Cats are comfortable being alone without being distressed. Sharing space without constant interaction normalizes quiet coexistence. Over time, this reinforces comfort with one's own presence. Psychologists now recognize this as healthy self-containment. This is why many people who love cats do not experience solitude as emptiness. They experience it as neutrality. Time alone does not threaten connection. It restores it. As these patterns accumulate, they begin to shape broader adult behavior. Emotional boundaries become clearer. Communication becomes more intentional. Relationships are approached with curiosity rather than urgency. And this quiet orientation, formed through repeated, ordinary interactions, continues to influence how people who love cats navigate complexity, uncertainty, and connection in the wider world. As these patterns settle, they begin to influence how people who love cats navigate responsibility, stress, and emotional complexity in everyday life. Living with a cat involves accepting limited control. You cannot command behavior. You cannot predict outcomes. You can only adjust your own actions. Over time, this reinforces a quiet internal orientation. Psychologists call this an internal locus of regulation, where stability comes from managing one's own responses rather than controlling the environment. This is why many people who love cats tend to remain composed under pressure. Composure here is not emotional distance. It is practiced self-regulation. When a cat ignores expectations, there is no point in forcing engagement. This trains flexibility. Instead of escalating frustration, people who love cats learn to redirect attention. Researchers now recognize this as adaptive coping, the ability to shift focus without suppressing emotion. This pattern often appears in professional settings. People who love cats are less likely to panic when plans change or outcomes remain uncertain. They adjust. They observe. They respond once enough information is available. In contrast to environments that reward constant urgency, this approach favors precision. Cats also teach respect for timing. A cat approaches when conditions feel right, not when demanded. Over time, this reinforces patience with processes that unfold slowly. This tendency often shows up later as tolerance for delayed outcomes. Progress does not feel urgent when timing is respected. In relationships, this becomes emotional pacing. People who love cats do not rush intimacy. They allow trust to develop gradually. Affection is expressed through consistency rather than intensity. Unlike relationships that rely on rapid emotional escalation, this orientation supports durability. Another overlooked influence is attention management. Cats occupy space without demanding it. Their presence is steady, not intrusive. Living alongside this trains focus. Distraction decreases. Awareness increases. Psychologists now recognize this as sustained attention. the ability to remain present without constant stimulation. This is why many people who love cats are comfortable in environments that others find too quiet. Silence does not signal absence, it signals stability. Quiet becomes a baseline, not a void. This comfort with quiet extends inward as well. Internal dialogue slows. Emotional reactions are processed rather than discharged. Instead of externalizing stress, people who love cats often internalize reflection. This tendency often shows up later as thoughtful decision-making. In contrast to cultures that reward constant expression and immediate output, this mindset values containment. Feelings are acknowledged without being amplified. Responses are measured rather than impulsive. As these behaviors repeat, they form a consistent psychological pattern. Calm does not come from avoidance. It comes from familiarity with uncertainty, boundaries, and restraint. And this orientation, shaped through ordinary interactions that appear insignificant on the surface, continues to guide how people who love cats handle complexity in an increasingly overstimulated world. When viewed in a broader context, the psychology of people who love cats becomes especially visible against the backdrop of modern social culture. Contemporary environments often reward visibility, speed, and constant expression. Emotional presence is frequently measured by responsiveness. Engagement is expected to be immediate and continuous. In contrast to environments that reward performance and overt affirmation, people who love cats tend to operate on a different rhythm. They are comfortable being present without announcing it. Presence does not require constant proof. This orientation influences how identity is formed. Rather than shaping behavior around external reaction, people who love cats develop a stable internal reference point. Researchers now recognize this as a form of emotional self-containment, where stability does not depend on constant external reinforcement. This does not mean detachment. It means selectivity. Attention is given where it matters. Energy is conserved rather than dispersed. Relationships are chosen, not accumulated. Unlike cultures that prioritize reach over depth, this mindset values continuity. There are trade-offs to this orientation. People who love cats may appear reserved in settings that reward overt enthusiasm. Their restraint can be misread as disinterest. Their comfort with silence can be mistaken for distance. But these perceptions miss the underlying structure. What appears minimal is often deliberate. Restraint is not absence. It is intention. This psychological pattern also shapes how uncertainty is handled. Instead of attempting to eliminate ambiguity, people who love cats learn to coexist with it. They do not demand immediate clarity from situations or people. This tolerance often shows up later as resilience in complex or emotionally layered environments. In contrast to cultures that frame uncertainty as a problem to solve quickly, this mindset treats uncertainty as information, something to be observed before acted upon. Over time, this creates individuals who are steady rather than reactive. They adapt without urgency. They respond without escalation. Their sense of security does not depend on constant affirmation or control. This is why many people who love cats navigate modern life with a quiet steadiness that feels increasingly rare. Understanding this psychology matters because it highlights an alternative way of relating. One built on attention rather than intensity, on boundaries rather than intrusion, on presence rather than performance. That is the psychology of people who love cats. If this explanation resonated, share which of these traits you recognize most clearly. Leave a comment describing the behavior that felt most familiar. If this kind of psychological insight adds value, support the channel by liking the video and subscribing for future explorations. Which aspect of this mindset do you see most often in yourself?